Welcome. Thanks for joining us today on our episode of Beyond the Stack. I'm Joshua Chris, the CTO here at CTMS. I'm going to be joined today by Savannah, who's going to be our moderator, and Kevin Lucas, our Director of Information and Technology. So thanks, guys, for joining us. We appreciate it. And Savannah, let's get it kicked off.
Hi, everyone. For today's podcast, we're going to be discussing data breaches and security in 2025. My first question for Josh is, while MSPs are often the first line of defense for many businesses, what are some of the ways leading MSPs are staying ahead of today's evolving threat landscape?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest thing is just, expediting the amount of time to respond to things that are happening, getting the right technology stacks to be able to get the information in front of the right people, kind of in an expedient manner. I think, training is also a big thing, like being able to work with end users to make sure that they know what to do in the event that something were to happen. One of the major things that buzzwords and, technologies everybody uses is like employee training, so having those phishing campaigns go out to everybody and, teaching your team what to do with those when somebody is getting something, and they accidentally click on it, we always want to make sure that they feel comfortable in reporting it. They don't feel like they're going to get fired or, something's going to happen. Those are kind of the big things that I see personally. Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one of the really big advantages you get is you don't have to do the recruiting of each individual employee and make sure you have a solid team. The MSP is doing that for you. So, you've got 3 or 4 people, maybe more, depending on the size, monitoring your stuff at all times. So you don't actually have to worry about, hey, this person, got to hire this person, got to recruit, got to train. Having an MSP there for you really just offloads all of that off of you. So it's just really seamless for you. You purchase the product and you get the protection, and it's just you deal with that one pain instead of managing a whole team.
Right.
Moving into our next question, which relates sort of to what Kevin was saying, while cyber criminals targeting vendors happens pretty much daily to weekly to reach many businesses at once, how are MSPs evolving their security models to become even more resilient and trustworthy?
Yeah, I think, just paying attention to the stacks that our customers are using and just understanding, a topic that we always run into is like a vendor having remote access or something to one of the key systems. Maybe they need to pull reports or pull data. We really have had to pay an extra amount of attention to what does that access look like? What data do they have access to? How are they able to get to it? And then just kind of securing that, making sure that it's audited, making sure that we are really careful to, if they go to a new vendor, take away the old vendor's access and, just rethinking how those vendors are able to access our customers' data. I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, if you have a lot of common vendors between different clients, you can very easily get a vendor agreement in place. And rather than having to have 30 different vendor agreements, you can work with one vendor agreement. The other real big advantage there is if you are running your own system, you have a view of your system. If you're working with an MSP, they're working with a huge variety of clients. If they have a SIM solution in place, we're pulling data from a whole bunch of clients. So we're able to see trends as they happen that if you are just an internal IT on your own island, you may not have insight into those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Starting with Kevin for our next question. What's the first security control, in your opinion, that every organization should implement today if they haven't already, and why?
Hands down is multi-factor authentication. The simple answer, it can stop roughly 98% of attacks before they even happen.
Yeah, I think MFA is super critical. There is a little bit of buzzwords about, how MFA isn't the silver bullet that it used to be. There are attacks and ways that people are able to bypass MFA, but it's like the very first building block that goes into your foundation for your tech stack. I think in addition to that is the user training. For me, I think the user training is kind of where it's at, where like you're making sure, MFA blocks a lot of the attacks, but we really want to make sure our users are smart and intelligent and kind of paying attention and engaged. And then that's kind of your other wall, the other piece of that foundation. I mean, there's tons of other things, but between MFA and user training, I think that's where it's at today.
I agree. I think those things really go well together. For example, if you don't have user training and they get an MFA prompt and just accept it.
Right. Right. That's exactly where it's coming
Yeah.
from, 100%.
Going into our next topic for today's podcast, how businesses can plan for security beyond 2025. Starting with Josh, how much should a business invest in cybersecurity in 2025, and what is the cost of cutting corners?
I think that it's going to continue to go up. I don't know that you can necessarily put a dollar amount to it, but I would say, just your budget should be expanding year to year, to basically every threat actor is looking for new ways to, attack somebody, new vectors and new different technologies and everything. So I think the biggest thing to do is to just make sure that, you are planning for that you are addressing, issues with firewalls and issues with your tech stack and all of these things, and just understanding that, it's not going to go down. So, I wouldn't put a dollar amount to it to say that, it's $100,000 or $50,000. I would just say that you need to plan for 25% growth in your budget when it comes to, cybersecurity and keeping those things safe. So that way you always have what you need, kind of to move through that. What do you think, Kev?
I agree completely. You really can't put a quantitative amount on that. Really, what you need to do to determine that kind of thing is start developing a risk register and determine what your company's risk appetite is. For some companies, you may have a bigger risk appetite. For others, you may have a lot less. You may be under some kind of HIPAA or GLBA or something like that. And that's going to make a big difference on your spending.
Yeah, for sure.
What cyber threats are lurking just over the horizon in 2026 and beyond? And are we ready for them as businesses and as society?
Yeah, if I can go, this is one that I'm pretty passionate about, and that's a great question, Savannah. So, I think one thing that people aren't necessarily aware of when it comes to cybersecurity is just kind of the infiltration methodology that people are using now. We've always kind of been that old castle. You put a moat and a drawbridge around everything, and you have, the best tools in place and the best SIEM and everything else. But I think what we're facing now with the, kind of the mix of AI and all the tools that are out there for that is things like hiring somebody and not doing thorough background check and not vetting those people, and kind of just letting them inside of your castle. And now they have access to everything. So, you do an interview with somebody and they have the best resume you've ever seen. The interview seems to be great. They know what to answer. They're saying everything right. Everything's great. Maybe it's a remote position, so you don't meet the person, physically in your office. You hire them, they get, if they're an engineer or they're, an IT, tier 3 engineer, you give them access to everything, right? And then, they're able to infiltrate data by already having the access because they're working for you. So just that's kind of a threat that's really emerging, and I think people aren't necessarily aware of is just paying attention to who you're hiring and making sure you're hiring good people. Like I said, you could have the best tech stack in the whole world, but if you hire somebody and they come in and they're able to exfiltrate your data, that doesn't stop anything. So for me, that's something that I'm really intrigued by. As somebody that does a lot of interviews, just like the fact that somebody can nowadays make an AI, agent or bot and jump that into a Zoom meeting, and that's the person that's talking. That's pretty incredible and very difficult to kind of deal with. So,
yeah, I was gonna go with a similar answer. I think that AI and deepfakes is a really, really big one.
Yeah.
They can get into your help desk, call up, and sound like the CEO of your company, and get keys to the kingdom that way. I think another really big emerging threat is hacking as a service.
right.
So
Yeah.
if anyone doesn't know what that is, you can literally go on the dark web. They have basically what amounts to a LinkedIn for hackers, and you can just recruit somebody, pay them an amount, and there you go. They do all the work for you. So that really, really puts you in a lot of danger as a company. It used to be, hey, maybe we get attacked, maybe we don't. You have to have a hacker that's interested in you. And now it can be anybody that has a bone to pick with you can go hire somebody to start messing with your company. So that one's pretty frightening.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was a security by obscurity. You were one of 1,000 of this type of company, or you're one of 100,000 MSPs. So, what are the chances that, somebody with the skill set to break in is going to attack you? And now it could be, somebody that you let go that just wants to hire a group on the internet. I mean, that's pretty crazy that we kind of deal with those kind of threats now.
Yeah, I think you guys both really touched on certain threats that we could be prepared for in 2026 and how companies can look out for them. Josh, you mentioned the background checks for certain individuals that are getting interviewed, which is a good point that I didn't necessarily think of. A lot of companies do run background checks, but most people may wonder why, which, yeah, I think that's a good point that brought light to a big issue that definitely will need to be paid attention to in the future.
Yeah.
What cybersecurity investments made today will still protect your business 3 years from now and beyond? And which ones would you think will not age well? Starting with Kevin, I think your position now would be a perfect opportunity for you to answer this question.
Yeah, quality firewalls is a really good start. We work with a lot of vendors that have outdated firewalls, outdated technology. They can do a lot these days, and you really should be trying to utilize those things. So I would recommend investing into a really good quality firewall.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think, we've said it many times, but investment in user training. Nowadays we hope we keep people for 3 to 5 years. It's not the way it was when my grandfather grew up and worked for Goodyear for 50 years, but if you're taking the dollars and the time and invested in, training your users, I think that's a long-term investment for sure. Firewalls, I agree with Kevin, that's a great investment as well. Some things that maybe don't age well is just, old school, basic antivirus that doesn't do, EDR or managed detection and response, MDR type stuff. Signature-based tools like those are kind of going away now because no longer is it the same code base that, hackers are using, with AI tools, the code base is constantly changing and stuff like that. So, those are the type of things I would say would not age well. But, firewalls and user training, those type of things, that's a really great investment. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Savannah. Those were great questions that you went through today. I really appreciate it. Kevin, thanks for joining me. That was awesome. Please tune in. We're going to be having a lot of very interesting guests come on the podcast and different people here and different moderators and everything. So really enjoy you guys coming and, doing this podcast with me. And we really thanks everybody for tuning in to this last episode of Beyond the Stack. So have a good one.
Thanks, Josh. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.